The smell of burnt coffee and printer toner always signaled the end of something. John stared at the manila envelope on his desk, the words "reduction in force" mocking his decade of loyalty. Once the valedictorian of his class, he was now a 30-year-old HR assistant with a cardboard box and a severance check that wouldn't cover 3 months of mortgage. He stepped out into the biting wind of a gray Tuesday, the city lights blurred by a sudden downpour. Therefore, when he arrived home, he expected a sanctuary, but what he found was the crushing silence of an empty foyer and the scent of expensive, unfamiliar perfume. Elena, his wife, was a rising star at the regional bank, a woman who had recently traded her warmth for the sharp edges of professional ambition. When she finally returned late that evening, her eyes didn't even meet his. He tried to tell her about the layoff, but she merely checked her watch, her mind already at tomorrow's board meeting. The distance between them wasn't just physical. It was a cavern filled with the echoes of who they used to be. He watched her back as she retreated to the guest room, the sound of her clicking heels on the hardwood floors sounding like a countdown to an inevitable explosion. Days blurred into a haze of job boards and rejection emails, but Elena's behavior became the true focal point of John's misery. She was working overtime every night, her phone glued to her palm like a lifeline. Therefore, when his old friend Mark dragged him out to a high-end lounge to drown his sorrows, John didn't expect to see the bank's logo on a company car parked outside. Inside, under the amber glow of the chandeliers, he saw her. Elena was laughing, a sound she hadn't made for him in years, as a younger, well-built man in a tailored suit leaned in to whisper in her ear. Their hands brushed on the marble countertop with a familiarity that felt like a knife to John's gut. He didn't make a scene. Instead, he watched the betrayal manifest in the way she looked at the stranger with the same adoration she once reserved for him. But when he confronted her in the kitchen later that night, her reaction was a cold, calculated strike. She didn't deny the distance. She weaponized it, suggesting they needed alone time to figure things out. John felt the urge to beg, to plead for their history, but a cold realization settled in his chest. He simply nodded, his face a mask of indifference, and walked away. That night, while she slept, he stared at the ceiling until the first rays of dawn touched the curtains, transforming his grief into a sharp, icy resolve. The morning brought a strange clarity. John didn't mope. Instead, he prepared a perfect breakfast, the smell of sizzling bacon and fresh ground beans filling the kitchen. He even kissed Elena's cheek before she hurried out, ignoring her confused glance. As soon as the door clicked shut, he called Loki. Loki had been his best friend since college, a shark of a lawyer who lived by the philosophy that trust was a luxury the poor couldn't afford. Elena had always hated him, sensing the threat of his cynicism. Therefore, John had kept his distance for years to keep the peace. When they met in Loki's glass-walled office, the lawyer didn't offer pity. He offered a strategy. "She wants space," Loki smirked, tossing a thick folder onto the mahogany table. "We'll give her an ocean." They spent hours cataloging every asset, every joint account, and every hidden liability. But John had a secret weapon, Project Echo, an AI prompt engineering application he'd been building in the midnight hours. It was a tool that could automate complex business workflows with simple natural language. To the world, he was a failed HR assistant. To the tech giant sniffing around his private GitHub repository, he was the next architect of the digital age. Loki realized then that John wasn't just protecting his meager savings, he was protecting a future empire. Living with Elena became a masterclass in psychological theater. John played the role of the doting, slightly pathetic husband, while spending his nights in the basement, his face illuminated by the cool blue glow of 3 monitors. Every line of code he wrote for Echo was a brick in the wall he was building between his past and his future. He was contacted by Ethelgard, a multinational tech conglomerate, for a private demo. The potential buyout was in the tens of millions, but he had to keep the deal hidden. If the divorce went through after the acquisition, Elena would be entitled to half of his genius. Therefore, he moved with the precision of a ghost, funneling the intellectual property into a shell corporation Loki had established. The sensory details of his double life were jarring. The soft, floral scent of the home he was losing during the day, and the metallic ozone smell of overclocked servers at night. He watched Elena come and go, her desire bags growing more frequent, her excuses more transparent. She thought she was winning a game of emotional attrition, unaware that the board had been flipped weeks ago.
The day John finally served the papers was the day Elena received her second promotion. She walked in, radiant, and smelling of celebratory champagne, only to find the divorce petition sitting on the center of the dining table next to a single red rose. The irony was palpable. She laughed at first, assuming it was a desperate plea for attention. But as she read through the cold, legal jargon and realized that John was the one initiating the split, her expression curdled from amusement to outrage. She began to shout, listing his failures, his lack of income, and his stagnant life. John just listened, his heart rate steady. He didn't argue. He didn't defend his honor. Therefore, her anger had nowhere to land, dissipating like smoke against a glass wall. "I want half of everything," she spat, her voice trembling with a mix of ego and fear. "Fine," John replied calmly. "Let the court decide what everything is worth." He packed his single suitcase and moved into a small studio Loki had rented for, leaving the luxury condo and the memories of their hollow marriage behind without a second glance. While the divorce proceedings dragged through the winter, John's professional life reached a boiling point. The meeting with Ethelgard wasn't in a boardroom. It was in a private hangar. The CEO, a woman who looked at code the way some look at fine art, was stunned by Echo's efficiency. John's plot logic was flawless. Therefore, the deal was struck. $20 million in upfront licensing with a significant equity stake. But the timing was critical. Loki worked tirelessly to ensure the final signatures coincided with the cooling-off period of the divorce. John lived on black coffee and a trail, the tactile sensation of signing the multi-million-dollar contract, a sharp contrast to the gratific courtroom hallways he frequented. He was a millionaire at shadow, still wearing his faded HR suits to depositions to maintain the illusion of a struggling spouse. He watched Elena's try to applaud his non-existent savings, while Elena herself sat across from him with a look of pity that I found increasingly hilarious. The courthouse was a monument of cold stone and lost time. On the final day of the settlement, the air was thick with the smell of old paper and forwards. Elena arrived accompanied by a man she introduced as her fiancé, a handsome, arrogant youth named Marcus, who couldn't have been more than 24. I recognized him instantly. Marcus was an intern in the very HR department John had been laid off from. The irony was almost poetic. Elena looked at John with a triumphant smirk as the judge finalized the division of assets, granting her half of the house and the meager joint accounts. She thought she had stripped him of everything. "I hope you find someone who can support your modest lifestyle," she whispered as they stood to him. John said nothing. He simply tucked his copy of the decree into his jacket pocket. The court had ruled on the assets of the John she knew, the HR assistant. They hadn't touched the assets of the founder of Echo, whose acquisition had been finalized exactly 1 hour after the court's watchword began. The midday sun hit the pavement with a blinding glare as they walked up to the courthouse. Elena and Marcus headed toward her modest luxury sedan, but John stopped at the curb. Sitting there, looking like a piece of fallen star, was a Lamborghini Revenant, one of only 20 in existence. Its matte gray finish absorbed the light, its engine idling with a low predatory growl. The valet handed John the keys. As he opened the scissor door, the scent of fresh Italian leather and high-octane power wafted out. Elena froze, her jaw dropping, her eyes darting between the car and the man she had just escorted. The realization hit her like a physical blow.